If you have seen the Oppenheimer movie, you will know that Oppenheimer was accused of being part of a circle of Soviet sympathizers led by the infamous spy couple Zarubin.
Today, we will examine the background to that story. Hello, darlings. I'm Astrid Deinhard.
And I'm Anna Deinhard. Hello!
Driven by paranoia, authoritarianism, and dogmatism, the Soviet Union basically wrote the book on modern espionage. It envisioned, pioneered, and implemented the foundations of any modern intelligence agency at a time when the rest of the world resembled toddlers playing in a sandbox, at least with respect to the world of espionage.
That is why, in today's episode, we will illuminate the foundations of the Soviet intelligence agencies using the stellar careers of two famous or infamous Soviet spies, the power couple of Soviet espionage.
Elizaveta Yulievna Zarubina and Vasily Mikhailovich Zarubin.
He, a gruff and overbearing man, sometimes hard to deal with, and her, charming and friendly, with classical beauty and delicate manners. Over almost 2 decades, they worked hand in hand in intelligence, becoming one of the most successful and powerful couples in the USSR.
Their story will take us from Russia to China, across Europe, over to the US, Hollywood, Washington, D.C., the Manhattan Project, and much more. In fact, there is so much more that this will be a 2-part special and the first in a series of Soviet-focused Spies and Ties episodes coming to you, and you have to look at all of them.
Right. Our story today begins not only before the start of the Second World War, but even before the start of the First. Vasily Mikhailovich Zarubin was born in 1894 in the Russian Empire, right before a time of complete chaos and change, which would completely alter the very fabric of Russian, soon-to-be Soviet society. Like many men in their late teens and early 20s, he joined the fight against the German Empire in 1914 and, in 1917, took up arms in the name of the proletarian revolution ignited by Lenin. It is here, during his fight for Russia's Soviet future, that the Cheka notices him.
Cheka is the very first Soviet secret police, created on December the 20th, 1917, with the task of persecuting class enemies, opponents of the revolution, members of the clergy, and so forth. In turn, Cheka created a special department tasked with maintaining security and preventing espionage and counter-revolutionary activities inside the military. It is this special department that sets its eyes on the young Zarubin as a capable young man.
And here is the job description. Cheka workers were expected to be brave, incorruptible, and devoted to the revolution. Also, according to Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of Cheka and member of the Central Committee since 1917, a Chekist had to have a warm heart, cool mind, and clean hands.
Vasily Zarubin proves himself a capable man working for the Cheka. Its successor, the State Police Directorate, the GPU in short, and its successor, the OGPU, and even in foreign intelligence.
Yeah, I know that's kind of confusing. The Soviet secret police changed names 3 times between 1917 and 1923, from Cheka to GPU to OGPU. Anyway, moving on.
First, he is sent to Siberia, sometimes in the early 1920s. There, in Vladivostok, as chief of the Foreign Trade Department of the EKU, he has the specific responsibility for combating the smuggling of narcotics and weaponry from Europe into China, at least officially. In reality, his motives might have been different ones, as the CIA explains.
The EKU is a Soviet economic intelligence and sabotage organization directly and exclusively responsible to the Politburo of the Communist Party of the USSR. The staff of the EKU gathers detailed information on the productivity, the personnel, and the equipment of all Western European firms. The task of the EKU is to conduct economic sabotage in Western European countries and to procure raw materials for the armaments industry of the Soviet Union.
Next stop, Soviet consulate Harbin, China, where Zarubin arrives in 1924. Here, he becomes a proper spy for the first time. Officially, he has a post at the Soviet consulate there, but that's a cover position, as he is actually a deputy chief of the OGPU, the successor of the GPU, as we learned, and its Residentura, or local branch.
What is a residentura and
Yeah,
what is
what
the
is it?
purpose?
What is
What's
it?
the purpose?
What is the purpose? Well, very early on, and according to the instructions of the Cheka, a residentura, or residency station, was to be created in every Soviet diplomatic or trade establishment abroad. The resident or station chief was in charge of the residentura and worked in the establishment under legal or diplomatic cover. In essence, this meant that officers assigned to the legal residentura were identified diplomats and thus protected due to their official status. At the outset, a resident might have only 1 or 2 officers who would assist him in his work. The resident was required to submit information to Moscow to be forwarded in secure code on a weekly basis.
In the Soviet intelligence system, there are also illegal agents. That's what they are officially called. Yeah, I know, it's funny, right? Illegals operate without diplomatic cover, under a false name and biography, and are low-key. Even if diplomatic ties with a country are broken, illegals can continue their activity, remaining concealed from the authorities.
Yes, back to Vasily Zarubin. Soon, he has his own agents and provides intelligence on the Japanese military activities in Manchuria.
Now, his dedicated work ethic and his good contact with foreigners come to the attention of the Foreign Intelligence Department, INO, a separate department formed by the Soviet secret police in 1920. Then Cheka, now OGPU. Why did they have to change their name so often?
Probably different bosses, I don't know. But on to Zarubin's next stop, Denmark. This time as an illegal spy. So, listen carefully. Prior to his departure to Denmark in 1927, I think, he receives instructions from the INO chief, Michael Tredizer, personally. Remember, Comrade Zarubin, a successful illegal must be an active participant in the ordinary life. He will be in public view of all those around him. His secret activities must proceed side by side with his open activity. This secret activity will be successful only if linked to all his day-to-day activities. The very essence of illegal activities is to carry out intelligence work while pursuing everyday normal business.
He is to reside in Denmark with the genuine American passport of a naturalized Finnish man who has no intention of coming back to the US and stays in the USSR. The Comintern has modified the passport and carefully inserted Zarubin's photo. After wrapping up his assignment, he gets back to Moscow to meet his future partner in crime and soon-to-be wife.
Enter the second half of the Soviet espionage power couple, Elizaveta, Eliza, Gorskaya, née Esther Yulievna Rosenzweig, codename Vardo, or Helen, born January the 1st, 1900. How wonderful, right? January 1st, 1900.
Yeah, I like that.
Jumping into the no.
Yeah, totally.
Lisa has been involved with communism since she was only 17, maybe partly because her father passed on his love for Russian revolutionary literature and Russian culture to her.
An intelligent woman, Lisa felt that the local university was too easy for her. So she studied at Sorbonne in Paris and Vienna, mastering French, German, and English, in addition to Yiddish, Russian, and Romanian. What on earth? There in Vienna, she took part in the communist underground activities in the 20s and soon came to the attention of the local intelligence officer. She served as a courier for the Comintern and later a translator for the Soviet embassy and trade delegation in Vienna.
She is a true believer in the cause, and her loyalty to Stalin goes beyond the norm, even within Soviet intelligence circles, going so far as to report a past lover because he had shown sympathy for Trotsky, by then an enemy of the state. Anyways, Lisa and Vasily marry in 1929, that was, right? What started as a relationship originally arranged by the NKVD, became a mutual caring union. How practical.
Yes, there is, or at this point in 1929 will be, another name change for the Soviet secret police, who would have guessed, or Central Intelligence Agency. In 1934, the OGPU will become the NKVD. Actually, it's more than a name change. This time, it's a reorganization and restructuring effort, which sees the NKVD becoming the Ministry of the Interior while incorporating all OGPU functions. But now we're getting kind of ahead of ourselves.
The marriage is most likely arranged because it is easier to set up a cover story for an illegal couple than for a single agent. Soon, the newlyweds have their first assignment together. Next stop, Paris, France, 1930. This time, they are posing as immigrants from Czechoslovakia under the name of Jaroslav Koček and Mariana Gorčekovaya.
France is a popular place among Russian anti-Bolshevik emigres after the revolution, so the Soviet leadership sees the need to observe these groups and infiltrate their circles to prevent any actual anti-Soviet activity from their side. Besides this, the agents that the Zarubins recruit in France provided Soviet intelligence with French technical data on military armaments as well as military activities prior to and during World War II.
However, soon they are given a new assignment, this time in Germany, where they arrive in the fall of 1934. Again, acting as illegals, this time they would indeed be out in the cold water, as the hostile environment allows them little to no help from the center, and all the information regarding their cover story and operation would have to be memorized.
The center is the INO HQ, the Foreign Intelligence Department HQ in Moscow. It gets its name from the highly centralized system of residenturas around the world, whose information is gathered and processed there.
The Zarubins are issued new forged passports with the name of Edward, Joseph, Herbert, and Sarah Herbert, née Graf, American citizens. These are real people. Or rather were, as both died in infancy years before. Their birth certificates were obtained by Soviet agents in the US and used to get US passports.
The principal task for Soviet intelligence in Germany was to learn of any concrete Nazi plans and/or preparations for war with the Soviet Union. As illegals, they naturally also need a work cover. Zarubin, aka Edward, is a salesman, and the other Zarubin, aka Zara, is a housewife. Of course. Their cover comes from a truly remarkable source, from a contact Vasily made during a short trip to the US in 1933.
Hollywood or, to be more precise, Paramount Pictures. One Boris Moros, a flamboyant Hollywood producer, works in a relatively high position there. He helps by setting up a Paramount office in Berlin and hiring a Zarubin or Herbert as a talent scout. Also, fabricating a stream of business correspondence and even sending a $50 per month salary that Herbert could use to prove his legitimacy.
Arguably, one of their most important contacts in Germany is Willy Lehmann, Agent A201, codename Breitenbach, who works for the Gestapo. He was already working with the local Residentura before the Zarubins arrive, and now they are his handlers.
He was an experienced specialist in counterintelligence work. Also, he had earned the confidence of the neo-Nazi regime in operating against the Soviet embassy and its trade mission. Of course, Lehmann also knew how to conceal his connection with Soviet intelligence. In April 1933, a subdivision was created in Lehmann's department for combating communist espionage targeting German officials who were known to have ties with communist organizations. Lehmann has access to a list of these officials who were to be arrested or deported by the Gestapo and was able to pass the list to the Residentura. At that time, he was also in a position to inform the Soviets that the Gestapo was involved with a group of white Russian emigres who were zealously devoted to combating communists.
Lehmann is also in a position to provide some intelligence on another interesting topic, rocket developments. Quite possibly, the most important scientific information Lehmann provided pertained to the development of German rocket technology that was under the direction of the young engineer designer Werner von Braun. Under the sponsorship of the German army, von Braun advanced liquid fuel rockets for military use. At the end of 1935, Lehmann personally attended a testing with army officers at a shooting range in a remote forest area. He observed that the German engineers at that time were working with a rocket possessing a range of 200 kilometers. Based on Lehmann's information on the testing, the center prepared a 6-page document for distribution to Stalin. Interesting tidbit. It is Lehmann who will, in a couple of years, provide his next handlers with the exact date of the German invasion of the USSR. But enough about him. Back to our Soviet power couple.
Next, the Zarubins visit the US a couple of times during the 30s. Once in 1935 when Vasily meets Moros, and in 36 and 7 looking for agents that may be recruited for work in Germany. All that with their forged American passport.
Upon their return to the Soviet Union in 1937, chaos and uncertainty awaits them. Their return coincides with Stalin's massive purges. The Great Purges had begun, resulting in the virtual decapitation of the Soviet political establishment, the military command, and the security and intelligence services. The purge of the NKVD had begun in the spring 1937, and by 1938, practically all Soviet residenturas abroad had been rendered leaderless. Theoretically, Soviet foreign intelligence ceased to exist. It was reported that during a 4-month period in 1938, the Soviet leadership did not receive any information from its foreign intelligence service.
Although having worked dutifully, the Zarubins are not spared. Lisa is officially discharged from the NKVD in 1939, and later Vasily comes under investigation by Beria. Lavrenti Beria is the chief of the NKVD. Again, that's the name of the Soviet intelligence agency at that time, and the central figure of the purges shaking the Soviet Union to the core.
But unlike so many other loyal patriots, the Zarubins do not end up at the end of a rope or in front of a firing squad. Lisa is reinstated a few months later, and Vasily takes up his duties once more, this time at a POW camp in Kozelsk, Russia. After the joint Soviet-German invasion of Poland, the USSR ends up with around 200,000 Polish POWs. The officers are sent to special camps, Kozelsk, Skarobelsk and Ostoshkov, where they are to be observed by a specially created NKVD department handling POW affairs.
Its task is to create agent-informer networks that would report on any counter-revolutionary activities inside the camp and potentially pluck out officers who could serve as agents outside the USSR for Soviet intelligence. Senior intelligence officers are sent to the camps to make sure everything goes smoothly, and Vasily is one of them.
Lisa, in the meantime, goes on a short work trip under the cover of being an English language teacher with an Austrian passport, once more becoming an illegal agent. But back to the camp, it is located 150 miles south of Moscow and houses about 5,000 officers of different ranks.
Zarubin is referred to as Kombrik, brigade commander, by the inmates, and besides investigative work, he takes up some administrative tasks. He also recorded the history and backgrounds of prisoners and, in all probability, drew up recommendations upon which the ultimate fate of the Polish officers depended.
He did not interrogate the prisoners himself, but could occasionally invite some of them for a talk. Usually he asked prisoners their opinion on various social, political, and philosophical problems. Tea and sometimes sweets are served in these meetings, and Zarubin remains very polite and courteous to the prisoners.
He was clearly the man who was required to form an opinion about the problem of the Polish prisoners and to report to the highest authorities in Moscow. It is still not clear whether these opinions played any role in the decisions-making regarding the fate of the Polish POWs, or if he made any recommendations for their future.
Ultimately, we only know of 8 individuals who are sent away because they are willing and deemed capable of working for Soviet intelligence in case of a German invasion. Sometime between the end of January and early February 1941, Zarubin is sent away, and in spring, the camps, including Kozelsk, are cleared out, and the prisoners, with a few exceptions, executed in the Katyn forest.
In the same year, a significant change comes to the U.S. Residentura. The previous resident, Gaik Ovakiviam, although talented and successful, was burned out and began to slip up in his work. As a result, the U.S. network went into disarray. This, in turn, led to his brief arrest on May 5th, 1941.
Soon, however, he is released by the Department of Justice on the condition that he would leave the country, never to return. Of course, another resident is appointed by the center, but soon also proves to be ineffective. The center believes that someone more aggressive would be more suitable. Q. Vasily Zarubin. In preparation for his new task, he meets the man himself, Joseph Stalin.
Stalin met with Zarubin before his departure for Washington on October 12, 1941, just as the Germans were on the outskirts of Moscow. Until then, our political intelligence collection in America had been minimal because we and the United States had no conflicting geopolitical areas of interest. Now, we realized we needed to know American intentions because America's participation in the war against Hitler would be decisive.
Stalin personally charged Zarubin with the following principal assignments. First, remain alert for any indications that Churchill and the American plan to make separate peace with Hitler and then turn against the Soviet Union. Second, obtain information about Hitler's war plans against the Soviet Union. Third, obtain information about the secret plans and goals of the Americans and British in the war, including opening a second front against Hitler. Fourth, obtain information about the latest military technology developed in the United States, Britain, and Canada, including information about the uranium atomic bomb.
The Zarubins, together with their son, now under the family name of Zubilin, arrive in the United States of America in January 1942, this time as legal spies. Vasily is officially appointed the third secretary of the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., and seemingly is just another mid-level diplomat.
Here, the system under Zarubin's control will be enormous. In 1941, Soviet intelligence had established one of its largest rezidentura intelligence stations in the United States with a total of 18 officers. Although Vasily is officially stationed in DC, he spends most of his time in New York City because 13 out of 18 total officers are stationed there. That's why New York is also the main residentura, while the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., the Soviet consulate in San Francisco, and the consulate in Los Angeles are sub-intelligence stations. These pod residenturi were run by a deputy resident and were under the ultimate supervision of Vasily Zarubin. In addition, Zarubin had responsibility for the residenturi at the Soviet embassies in both Canada and Mexico.
While Vasily certainly has his hands full, Lisa also manages to gain quite a reputation of herself, as Boris Moros, the Zarubins' Hollywood contact, remembers. Often heard other communist women talking of Elizabeth as though she were a sort of red Jeanne d'Arc, a saint whose faith to the Soviet was pure and bottomless. They also had great respect for her intellect and judgment. Often I heard these wives of other spies say, while in the midst of a dispute over some matter of strategy, "Well, what did she say about it?" Or, "Let's ask Lisa." Or, "Don't argue, Helen said so," as though Madame Zubilin had the last word. She was generally acknowledged to be the real brain behind whatever shrewd moves her blustering husband made. The other women also told me that Zubilin occasionally beat his wife, and that she took these trashings with saintly resignation.
Remember, Zubilin is the family name of the Zarubins after they came to the US in 1942. In any case, the circle under the Zarubins now includes Nathan Silvermaster, cool name by the way, and his circle of agents, Harry Dexter White, an advisor and right-hand man to the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, the antenna group who used to belong to Jacob Golos and whose central figure is Julius Rosenberg.
Don't worry, we'll cover more of what exactly these different sources brought to the table in part 2, or even in their own specials, like in the case of Julius Rosenberg. But just to show how impressive the spy network headed by the Zarubins is at this point in 1942, just in the top secret Manhattan Project, where the US develops the world's first nuclear bomb. They have 29 agents.
We recently released a War Against Humanity special about the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, something that cannot ever be repeated. Watch the episode and find out for yourself what horror the atomic bombs released on Japan.
Back to the Zarubins. Right now, they have their sights on a little-known physicist named Julius Robert Oppenheimer to see whether they can get him, knowingly or unknowingly, to aid the Soviet Union.
But that's all for today. To find out what happens next if the Zarubins manage to get their hands on Oppenheimer, which other secrets they can extract from the US and pass back to the Kremlin, how the cooperation between Hollywood and the Soviet power couple continues, and much more. Tune in for part 2. As we already hinted at in the beginning, this is the first of a series of videos where we will focus more on Soviet espionage activities and the most influential individuals within them. So, there is loads to be excited about.
If you like to know more about espionage operations throughout the Second World War, check out our other Spies and Ties videos. For example, do you know about Operation Sunrise, where the Allies negotiated the surrender of the German troops in Italy? If not, go check it out somewhere here. To get ever more content like this, join the Time Goes to Army at timegoes.tv or at patreon.com. And we will see you next time. Darlings.